we're interrupting your regular programming with breaking news.
And as you heard, this is the deadliest mass shooting in United States history.
58 people were killed in this rampage, hundreds more injured.
And the first person he saw, the man was still on the ground, and he just shot him.
This was the chilling moment a gunman opened fire on a crowd of concert-goers, killing 60 people and injuring nearly 1,000 others from more than 400 yards away. It remains one of the deadliest mass shootings in U.S. history, but it wasn't the last. Let's take a look at the top 10 worst mass shootings in American history, counting down from the lowest to the highest death toll.
There has been some very unfortunate, tragic breaking news out of Lewiston, Maine this evening. Another mass shooting.
Law enforcement sources there say at least 16 people are dead and dozens more injured.
Multiple law enforcement agencies spent the late evening and overnight hunting down this man. Police are labeling him as a person of interest.
On the night of October 25th, 2023, 40-year-old Robert Card used an assault rifle to kill 18 people and wound 13 more at a bowling alley and a bar in Lewiston, where cornhole players gathered to chill. Ironically, Mr. Card wasn't some outsider with a criminal past. He was a sergeant first class in the U.S. Army Reserve, having enlisted back in December 2002. His role was a petroleum supply specialist, and he had never seen combat or been deployed overseas. Plus, for most of his life, he seemed fairly sane. But that reality began to shift in 2022 when he started losing his hearing. Family members also noticed he had become withdrawn, irritable, and got angry at the slightest things. Then, by the spring of 2023, his mental state had deteriorated even further. Card began to believe that people at a local market and the bar where he played cornhole were spreading rumors about him, even accusing him of being a pedophile. He also lost a significant amount of weight. And then in July 2023, things escalated dramatically during an Army Reserve assignment when Card's troubling behavior led his commander to have him admitted to a civilian psychiatric facility in New York. Doctors there diagnosed him with psychosis and homicidal thoughts, even noting he had compiled a hit list of people he wanted to kill. Despite this, plans to commit him involuntarily were abandoned under what an Army report later called questionable circumstances, and he was released after 19 days. Now, releasing him wasn't the problem. The real mistake the sheriff's department made was failing to seize his weapons, even when they knew he had compiled a hit list, and that one oversight would end up costing the lives of more than a dozen people only months later. At 6:54 p.m. on October 25th, Card walked into Just-in-Time Recreation, a bowling alley in Lewiston, with a Ruger 308 Suffer rifle, outfitted with a scope and laser sight. Around 60 people, including 20 children, were inside at the time. Then, in less than a minute, he fired 18 rounds, killing 8 people and injuring 3 more. Several others were hurt while trying to escape. Among the dead were 2 men, Jason Walker and Michael Delorier II, who bravely rushed at Card in an attempt to stop him, and their sacrifice gave others precious time to flee or hide, ultimately saving lives. At 6:55 p.m., the first 911 call came in, and dozens more followed. Within minutes, law enforcement and emergency medical teams were on the scene, searching for the gunman and tending to the wounded. But by then, Card had already left. He drove 4 miles to Chemingay's Bar and Grill, arriving at 7:07 p.m. Leaving his car running outside, he entered the building and, in just 78 seconds, unleashed 36 rounds. 10 more people were killed, and another 10 were wounded. Chaos also added to the injuries, with 7 more hurt in the scramble to get out. The first 911 call from Chemingay's came in at 7:08 p.m., and officers arrived in less than 5 minutes, but with ambulances still tied up at bowling alley, police and even civilians had to transport victims to nearby hospitals in their own vehicles. Investigators quickly gathered surveillance footage, capturing images of Card and his car. By 7:52 p.m., those images were shared with law enforcement, and at 8:06 p.m., they were made public. Less than an hour later, one of Card's relatives called in, identifying him and pledging full cooperation with authorities. By 9:15 p.m., a nationwide BOLO, be on the lookout, ye, alert went out with his name, description, and license plate number. Cell phone records showed his device had been left at his home before the shootings. Authorities made their first breakthrough at 9:56 p.m. when Lisbon police discovered his abandoned vehicle at a local boat launch. However, no clues were inside. And then over the next 2 days, more than 400 officers scoured the area in a massive manhunt, coordinating from command posts set up in Lewiston. Finally, on the evening of October 27th, trained search teams searching through 55 trailers at the Maine Recycling Corporation in Lisbon made a brutal discovery. In the last trailer they checked, Robert Card was found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. How he ended up there, no one knows. But his story didn't end with just his death. Months later, in March 2024, a commission released an interim report sharply criticizing the Sagadahoc County Sheriff's Office. Investigators concluded the department had more than enough probable cause to detain Card and remove his weapons in the weeks before the attack. Instead, they left that responsibility to his family, a decision the commission described as an abdication of law enforcement's responsibility. An autopsy report released the same month also revealed another grim finding. Scientists who studied Card's brain discovered significant trauma, resembling the kind of damage seen in veterans exposed to blast waves from explosions.
Tonight, inside the unspeakable horror, officers running to the scene with the 18-year-old gunman already inside Robb Elementary School, where second, third, and fourth graders were in the middle of their day.
We begin tonight with a video that's been released by media in Texas. It shows more than an hour of inaction by law enforcement in Uvalde as a gunman killed 19 children and 2 teachers.
On May 24th, 2022, Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, began its day like any other. But by sunset, it had become the site of one of the deadliest mass shootings in U.S. history. The gunman, 18-year-old Salvador Ramos, a former student, carried out a wave of violence rarely seen from a single school shooter in recent times. Yet, what made this tragedy even more horrifying wasn't only the senseless brutality, it was the fact that law enforcement waited an agonizing 77 minutes outside before finally confronting him. In the months leading up to the attack, Ramos had already been displaying alarming behavior. He once tried to convince his older sister to buy him a gun, but she refused. Then, just a day after turning 18 on May 17th, he legally purchased a Smith & Wesson semi-automatic rifle from a local shop. 3 days later, he bought another. Investigators would later discover that at least one of the rifles had been fitted with a Hellfire trigger device designed to increase its firing speed. Ramos wasn't exactly secretive about his plans either. Days before the massacre, he sent someone on Instagram a receipt for an AR-15 style rifle and 500 rounds of ammunition he had purchased. Then, the day before the attack, he posted a picture of 2 rifles to his Instagram story, making it clear he had set his mind on carrying out his twisted plans. Now, on that dreadful day, Ramos began his killing spree by shooting his 66-year-old grandmother in the face after a heated argument about his education. Then, he stole her black 2008 Ford F-150 truck and sped off toward Robb Elementary School. At the school's premises, a teacher had briefly propped a door open with a rock while running to her car to grab food. But at that moment, she witnessed Ramos crash his grandmother's truck into a ditch nearby. Realizing something was terribly wrong, she rushed back inside, grabbed her phone, and called 911. But before authorities could respond, Ramos was already on his way into the school, armed and ready. He walked straight inside without resistance. The hallways were mostly empty, but one student glanced out of his classroom, spotted Ramos, and quickly ran back inside to hide. Ramos then entered a classroom connected to another, where about 40 students and several teachers were gathered, and without hesitation, he opened fire sporadically. In desperation, some students pretended to be dead. Among them was Maya Cirillo, who smeared herself with a classmate's blood to make it look like she had already been shot. Officers arrived just 3 minutes after Ramos entered the building. They made it to rooms 111 and 112, but as soon as Ramos fired at them, hitting 2 officers, they backed off. Instead of pushing forward, they retreated and stood outside, pleading with the shooter to have mercy on the victims, while innocent students lay dying inside those classrooms.
Sir, if you can hear me, please put your firearm down, sir. Please don't hurt anyone else. Sir, if you can hear me, please put your firearm down, sir. We don't want anybody else hurt.
Outside the school, desperate parents pleaded with officers to go in and stop the shooter. And when they refused, some parents tried to rush in themselves. But instead of helping, those officers tackled them, pinned them to the ground, and even threatened to use tasers if they didn't back off. Meanwhile, inside, Ramos was still with the students. But let's be clear, the problem wasn't just fear. Those officers lacked proper training for this kind of combat, and Ramos was armed with an AR-15, which is far more powerful than the standard issued firearms they carried. To make matters worse, there was complete confusion over who was in charge. No one knew who to take orders from, so instead, they just stood around for more than an hour. Finally, after 77 agonizing minutes, a U.S. Border Patrol tactical unit agent carrying a shield led a team into the classroom, and Ramos, who had been hiding in a closet, opened fire, but officers shot back, killing him instantly. The nightmare was finally over, but the damage was irreversible. 22 people, including Ramos, lost their lives, while 21 others were fatally wounded. Families were shattered, a community was left in ruins, and the world was left questioning how officers of the law could stand by doing nothing for over an hour while victims were dying inside.
At just about 4 p.m. on July 18, 1984, the worst massacre in San Diego's history began at a packed McDonald's in San Ysidro.
These images are more of war than of a small fast food restaurant in San Ysidro. Yet it was a local man dressed in battle fatigues who declared, "I have killed 1,000, I'm gonna kill 1,000 more."
When the gunshots stopped, 21 people were dead, another 19 injured.
On July 18, 1984, a man walked into a McDonald's and carried out what can only be described as a mass execution, not just a shooting. Just 3 days earlier, on July 15th, the shooter, James Huberty, told his wife, Etna, that he thought something might be wrong with his mental health. The year before, he had lost his job in Ohio, and after that, he moved his family to San Diego, where he worked as a security guard. But a month before the shooting, he was fired again. Now, on July 17th, the morning before the attack, Huberty called a San Diego mental health clinic, asking for an appointment. He gave them his number, and was told someone would call him back. According to Etna, Huberty then waited quietly by the phone for hours, but eventually he left on his motorcycle, still expecting a call. What he didn't know, though, was that the receptionist had misspelled his name. On top of that, because he sounded calm and mentioned he'd never been hospitalized for psychiatric reasons, the clinic categorized his case as not urgent. That meant they planned to get back to him within 48 hours, but Huberty didn't have that time. The next morning, July 18th, the family headed to the San Diego Zoo, but while walking through the exhibits, Huberty suddenly turned to his wife and said he felt like his life was already over. He mentioned that the clinic never called him back and told her flat out that society had its chance to save him. After grabbing lunch at another McDonald's, Huberty took his family home. There, he changed into a maroon t-shirt and green camouflage pants, picked up a gun and a box of ammunition, and chillingly told his wife he was going hunting for humans. Not long after, pulled into the parking lot of a McDonald's just 200 yards from their apartment, and at about 3:56 p.m., Huberty walked inside carrying a 9mm Browning HP pistol, a Uzi carbine, a pump-action shotgun, and enough ammunition to keep shooting for 2 hours. Inside were 45 unsuspecting customers. Huberty ordered everyone to the ground and then, without hesitation, started firing. Within just 10 minutes, he had killed 20 people, including 4 who tried to run. The gunfire was so relentless that officers outside thought there must have been more than one shooter. At one point, he even turned his weapon on a fire truck arriving at the scene, grazing a firefighter with a bullet. Among his victims were 3 boys who had biked over for strawberry shakes. Only one survived. He shot employees behind the counter and others cooking in the kitchen. At one point, he even found 5 workers hiding in a storage room and gunned them down as well. 2 employees tried to escape hand in hand, but only one made it, while the other was shot in the back. However, nearly an hour after the nightmare began, a worker managed to slip out through the basement and informed SWAT that Huberty was acting alone and didn't have hostages. With that confirmation, sharpshooters were ordered to lock in and take shots. Thankfully, a sniper's bullet pierced Huberty's chest, killing him instantly. And once officers confirmed he was dead, they entered the restaurant to save those still alive. He murdered 21 people and injured 19 more.
Shooting at a Walmart has led to multiple deaths and more than 20 people wounded.
The gunman in the mass shooting at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, sentenced to serve 90 consecutive life terms.
On August 3rd, 2019, a mass shooting at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, claimed dozens of lives, making it the 7th deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history and one of the deadliest attacks ever carried out against Latinos anywhere in the world. The shooter was a 21-year-old from Allen, Texas. He wasn't part of any group. He had no serious criminal record and he was acting completely alone. Yet, his motivation was clear. Patrick Wood Crucius was fueled by anti-immigrant and white supremacist beliefs, which he laid out in a manifesto he posted online just before the attack. Violence started around 10:39 a.m. inside the Walmart at the Cielo Vista Mall, a store that was always busy with both American and Mexican shoppers because of its spot right near the U.S.-Mexico border. Crucius had driven almost 10 hours from Allen, a suburb suburb of Dallas, all the way to El Paso. When he got there, he stopped by the mall, went inside to grab some food, and then headed back to his car, where he pulled out an AK-47 style semi-automatic rifle. Moments later, he walked back toward the store, opening fire in the parking lot before continuing to shoot as he entered inside. Now, once in the store, he moved through the aisles and checkout lines where people were gathered, picking out his targets deliberately. The victims ranged in age and were a heartbreaking mix of U.S. citizens and Mexican nationals. Parents threw themselves over their children. Elderly shoppers were gunned down. A mother was killed shielding her infant, who somehow survived. And even an Army veteran was murdered while shopping with his wife. The entire attack lasted just 6 minutes, but the scene was intense. Bodies were left scattered across the floor, while terrified survivors hid in storage rooms or sprinted into nearby businesses. Outside, police raced to the scene as 911 calls poured in by the dozens. Crucius tried to make a run for it. There was absolutely no way he could make it far, especially with law enforcement shutting down the entire perimeter. Less than a mile away, near a Sam's Club, officers stopped him and he surrendered without incident. Not long after, investigators discovered a manifesto he had posted on the notorious site 8chan. He called it an inconvenient truth. In it, he ranted about what he claimed was a Hispanic invasion of Texas, and even praised the Christchurch mosque shooter. He admitted that he picked El Paso specifically because of its large Latino population, and from that manifesto alone, it was clear that his attack wasn't random. It was as deliberate as it was hateful. Subsequently, Crucius was charged with capital murder and federal hate crimes. In February 2020, he pleaded guilty to state charges and received 90 consecutive life sentences without parole. Then, in July 2023, a federal judge handed down another 90 consecutive life terms, ensuring he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Prosecutors didn't pursue the death penalty, stating that the plea deal he took was enough for them. And in the aftermath of that mass shooting, Crucius left 23 people dead, 22 others wounded, and countless families trapped in fear, facing a nightmare they had absolutely no control over.
The death toll rises to 23 in Killeen after an unidentified gunman opened fire in a Luby's cafeteria.
The Luby's cafeteria mass shooting is the 6th deadliest in U.S. history, and in just a moment, you'll find out why. On October 16, 1991, 35-year-old George Hennard drove his blue 1987 Ford Ranger pickup truck through the front window of a Luby's cafeteria in Killeen, Texas. Then, without hesitation, he pulled out a Glock 17 pistol, later switching to a Ruger P89, and opened fire on the lunchtime crowd. Keep in mind that Hennard, from Belton, Texas, only did this because apparently his life was a mess. He had been dismissed from the Merchant Marine, struggled with drug addiction, and had a disturbing history of stalking and harassing women. This guy was a complete loser with zero charm, and let's just say that frustration fueled the rage that drove him to carry out the attack that day. But unfortunately, the attack happened during the busy lunch rush on Boss's Day. Around 150 people were packed into the cafeteria near Fort Hood when, at 12:39 p.m., Hennard crashed his truck through the glass, instantly turning the dining room into a war zone. As he opened fire, Hennard shouted, "All women of Killeen and Belton are vipers. This is what you've done to me and my family. This is payback day." Survivors later recalled how he deliberately targeted women, even calling some before shooting them at point-blank range.
When he started with the women comments, I kind of thought he was after women only, or that his wife was in there or something and they had had a fight and he was after her, looking for her or something like that. But when he kept going around, it was obvious it wasn't just a person he was after.
He fired more than 96 rounds, calmly reloading as he moved through the restaurant. Witnesses said he stepped over men to execute women, sparing a mother and her child, but killing others hiding under tables. One survivor, Joan, found herself staring straight into the barrel of his gun, but was spared when the chamber clicked empty.
And by this time, I started to turn around and to run out. And I looked back again, and he had the gun up towards my direction. And when I saw him do that, he was kind of like just moving around.
And by the time it was all said and done, there was shattered glass, bullet holes everywhere, and bodies lying across the floor. Authorities later described the scene as surrealistic and nightmarish. Some people managed to escape through a back exit, but for many, there was no way out. Police eventually rushed to the scene and engaged Hennard in a tense shootout. He rushed to a hallway near the restrooms, and with no way out, Hennard turned one of his pistols on himself, ending his own life around 12:53 p.m. When officers officers searched his body, they found extra ammunition, proof he had planned for even more carnage. But thankfully, that didn't happen because at this time, 23 people had been killed and 27 others injured. Yet the tragedy didn't just end in that cafeteria. Susanna Hupp, who lost both her parents in the attack, went on to push for concealed carry rights in Texas, leading to the 1995 law signed by then-Governor George W. Bush. On a national level, the massacre shaped the Democratic Party's gun control platform, and in the long run, this single massacre became one of the defining reasons Texas turned into the gun-friendly state it is today.
Police say 26-year-old Devin Kelly started firing outside the First Baptist Church before unleashing a rampage inside.
At least 26 people were killed there when a gunman opened fire on the church during the Sunday morning service. About 20 people were injured. The victims range in age from 5 years old to 72.
On November 5th, 2017, a gunman opened fire at the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, killing 26 people and wounding 22 others. The shooter was identified as 26-year-old Devin Patrick Kelly, who lived in New Braunfels, Texas. He had once served in the Air Force at a base in New Mexico, but was court-martialed in 2012 for assaulting his wife and child. Kelly then spent a year in confinement and was discharged in 2014 with bad conduct on his record. However, there was really no clear motive behind his attack that Sunday. According to the sheriff and other officials, Kelly first stopped at a gas station across Highway 87 from the church. He then drove across the road, stepped out of his car, and began firing from outside before moving toward the right side of the church.
He was shooting people while he was walking in there. Everybody was so quiet, you could only hear the sound of the bullets. And people screaming.
It was just after the Sunday service began at 11 a.m. that Kelly stormed in with a Ruger military-style rifle, shooting rapidly, and within minutes, many of the worshipers inside were either dead or badly wounded. Among those killed were several children, a pregnant woman, and the pastor's daughter. Meanwhile, authorities received the first 911 call around 11:20 a.m. Witnesses said Kelly appeared fully prepared for a deadly assault, wearing black tactical gear, carrying a ballistic vest, and loaded with multiple rounds of ammunition.
As he exited the church, a local resident grabbed his rifle and engaged that suspect.
But as Kelly left the church, a local resident, Stephen Williford, armed with his own rifle, confronted him. Williford, an experienced marksman, exchanged gunfire with Kelly, striking him twice, in the leg and torso. Kelly dropped his rifle and fled in his SUV. Another resident, Johnny Langendorf, happened to drive by and quickly joined Williford in pursuit. The two chased Kelly for about 10 miles into neighboring Guadalupe County. During the chase, Kelly, bleeding and realizing he wasn't going to survive, called his father to say he'd been shot, and then soon after, his vehicle struck a road sign and overturned in a ditch. When authorities arrived, they found Kelly dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. It's still unclear whether Williford's bullets directly contributed to his death. Either way, police secured the scene within minutes. While back at the church, over 24 people were dead.
Right here in Newtown, Connecticut, the site today of a mass shooting, and this time gunfire aimed at elementary school children.
They say he had so much ammunition that many more could have been killed.
On the morning of December 14, 2012, at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut, Adam Lanza killed 20 first graders and 6 school employees before turning a gun on himself. Earlier that day, he killed his mother inside the house they shared. And if you're wondering why anyone would even do something like that, well, it's because Lanza struggled with severe mental health issues that made it hard for him to function socially or live what most would consider a normal life. On top of that, he resented his mother for wanting to move out of their Connecticut home and had a strained relationship with her. All of this made her the first target in what he had already planned to be a suicide mission. But what's even more chilling is that the mental health experts who had worked with Lanza never saw anything that could have predicted he'd end up doing something so extreme. After killing his mother, Lanza drove to Sandy Hook Elementary and arrived shortly after 9:30 a.m. The school doors were locked, so he shot through a glass panel by the front entrance to get inside. The sound drew the attention attention of principal and the school psychologist, who rushed to investigate, but they were both gunned down almost immediately. 2 other staff members were wounded as Lanza pushed further inside, heavily armed with a semi-automatic rifle, 2 pistols, and hundreds of rounds of ammunition. One of his first stops was room 8. Inside, substitute teacher Lauren Rousseau was desperately trying to hide her first graders in a bathroom, but Lanza forced his way in, killing Rousseau, behavioral therapist Rachel Davino, and 15 students. Sadly, 14 of them died instantly, while another passed away later at the hospital. When officers arrived, they discovered nearly all of them crowded into the bathroom, and remarkably, one girl survived by pretending to be dead. Lanza then went into room 10, where teacher Victoria Soto had quickly hidden some students in a bathroom or closet while placing others under desks. Accounts vary on what happened in those tense moments, but what's clear is that several students managed to escape, thanks in part to a brave first grader Jesse Lewis, who shouted for his classmates to run. However, Jesse was shot and killed for his bravery, while teacher Soto was also murdered after reportedly putting herself between Lanza and her students. Another teacher, Anne Marie Murphy, lost her life while shielding Dylan Hockley, who tragically did not survive either. Now, by the time Lanza left room 10, 5 more students had been killed, and despite the carnage, 9 were able to flee the classroom. And around 9:40 a.m., when Lanza realized the police were closing in, he turned the gun on himself inside one of those classrooms and took his own life. In all, the massacre lasted only about 10 minutes, but in that brief window, 27 lives were lost and 2 more people were left injured. At the time, Sandy Hook stood as the second deadliest school shooting in U.S. history, behind only the Virginia Tech massacre in 2007, where 32 students and teachers were killed before the gunman also committed suicide. And yes, that's exactly what we'll be getting into next.
You have vandalized my heart, my soul, and torched my conscience. You thought it was one pathetic boy's life you extinguished. Like Moses, I split the sea and lead my people, the weak, the defenseless, and the innocent children of all ages. You had 100 billion chances and ways to have avoided today, but you decided to spill my blood. You forced me into a corner and gave me only one option.
Shortly after 7 a.m. on April 16, 2007, Sung-Hoi Cho, a mentally disturbed student from Seoul, South Korea, began what would become his deadly attack at Virginia Tech by shooting to death his first victim, Emily Hilscher, a freshman who lived in room 4040 near the elevators on the 4th floor of West Ambler Johnston Hall. Within moments, Ryan Clark, a resident advisor in the building, lost his life. Investigators believe Clark stepped out of his room to check on the disturbance, only to be gunned down as well. They also never found any personal link between Cho and Emily, making them wonder why he chose to start there, or why he didn't stop there. But either way, by 7:15 a.m., campus police had received a 911 call reporting the dormitory shootings, yet no university-wide alert was issued. At 7:30 a.m., Emily's roommate, Heather Hoff, arrived and informed officers that Emily's boyfriend, Carl Thornhill, had dropped her off earlier that morning. She also mentioned that he owned guns and had recently taken Emily to a shooting range, so acting on the old cliche that Thornhill might have killed her over some dispute, they pursued him down a highway and interrogated him, but of course they had the wrong guy. Meanwhile, Cho returned to his dorm after killing his first 2 victims, where he put together a package containing videos, photos, and an 1-800-word manifesto filled with hate. He mailed it to NBC in New York at 9:01 a.m. before heading back to arm himself. Minutes later, Virginia Tech issued a campus-wide email about the earlier shooting, but by then Cho was already preparing for the next stage of his attack, this time at Norris Hall, just a short walk across campus. Around 9:30 a.m., Cho entered Norris Hall dressed in cargo pants, a sweatshirt, an ammunition vest, and a maroon Virginia Tech cap, carried a backpack stuffed with supplies, including a receipt for one of his guns, along with chains and knives. Written on his arm were the words, Ax Ismael, a phrase that has never been fully explained, but may have had some kind of biblical connection. Then, once inside, he used the chains to lock the building's doors from within, and with the exit secured, he moved upstairs to the 2nd floor, where classes were in session. The stairwell he climbed led to a hallway in the shape of an L, lined with 7 classrooms. 2 of those rooms were empty, but 5 were filled with students and professors. Cho stormed into 4 of them with his guns drawn out, and in a span of just 10 to 15 minutes, forensic evidence shows he fired over 175 rounds, murdering 30 people. people in what would become the deadliest school shooting in American history. As police rushed to the scene, officers blasted open the chain doors with a shotgun. That sound, investigators believe, alerted Cho that his time was almost up, and so moments later, they found him in the stairwell. He had turned one of his own guns on himself, ending his life. And with that, the violence came to end, but not without claiming the lives of 32 people and leaving 23 others injured.
Today we're dealing with something that we never imagined and is unimaginable.
By the time it was all over, at least 50 people dead, even more injured tonight.
There was bodies everywhere, and I was crawling. I just kept crawling.
I don't know if he was left in the club, if he got shot, or if he's being worked on here.
On the night of June 12, 2016, Pulse, one of Orlando's most popular nightclubs, was packed with more than 300 people from across the LGBTQ community. It was their occasional Latin night, but just after 2 a.m., the celebration turned into chaos when a gunman forced his way inside and started shooting. The attacker was 29-year-old Omar Mateen, a U.S. citizen born in Queens, New York, to Afghan immigrant parents. Mateen had already been on the FBI's radar years earlier because back in 2013, he'd alarmed co-workers at his security job by claiming ties to both Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah. That triggered a 10-month investigation where agents labeled him a person of interest, but in the end, they didn't find enough to charge him. Then in 2014, his name came up again, this time because a man he knew traveled overseas and became a suicide bomber for the Nusra Front in Syria. The FBI interviewed Mateen again, especially after a friend reported that Mateen had been watching extremist propaganda videos from Anwar al-Awlaki. Still, investigators closed the case with no evidence to act on. Meanwhile, Mateen had been working as a licensed security guard in Florida since 2007, which meant he legally held a firearms license. His name had been placed on the federal terrorist screening database while he was under investigation, but once the cases were closed, it was taken off. And even if it had stayed, being on that watch list wouldn't have stopped him from buying guns. And in early June 2016, just days before the attack, Mateen legally purchased 2 firearms, a Sig Sauer MCX semi-automatic assault rifle on June 4th, and a Glock 9mm pistol the very next day. Sadly, both weapons would later be used inside Pulse. Now, when Mateen entered the club on that tragic night, an off-duty Orlando police officer named Adam Grueller was already there, working security. As soon as shots rang out near the entrance, Grueller returned fire, but quickly pulled back when he realized he was outgunned. He called for backup, and within minutes, police units and medics rushed to the scene, carrying victims across the street to a makeshift triage area. Some officers with SWAT training broke through a window and tried to engage the shooter, but by then, several minutes had already passed. Many people managed to escape, but dozens remained trapped, injured, or worse, dead. And for the next 20 minutes, terrified survivors called 911, updated friends on social media, and described what was happening in real time, with gunfire continuing, people hiding, and others bleeding out inside. At 2:35 a.m., Mateen himself called 911, and while on the line, he pledged loyalty to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS. At that point, police realized the situation had shifted from an active shooter to a full-blown hostage crisis. Negotiators spoke to Mateen 3 separate times for a combined 28 minutes, while critically wounded victims were still inside without help. During these conversations, Mateen claimed he had planted a bomb outside in a car and that he was wearing an explosive vest like the ones used in the 2015 Paris attacks. He also searched for news about himself on his phone and texted his wife while at it. Then, at around 4:21 a.m., police managed to get a few people out by removing an air conditioning unit from a wall in the dressing room. Those survivors told officers that Mateen planned to strap explosives onto 4 hostages within 15 minutes, and that was the breaking point. SWAT and bomb squads began preparing to storm the building. By 5:02 a.m., officers set off controlled explosions, then used an armored vehicle to break through the wall. Hostages rushed out, and a final gunfight broke out between Mateen and police, leading to his death at the scene. Investigators later confirmed there were no bombs or vests, and his threats had been bluffs all along. It was the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history at that time until...
Breaking news. ABC News has learned of the gunman's extraordinary planning, possibly checking into multiple hotels before the attack, all within shooting distance of that concert site.
The spray of bullets hitting the crowd of more than 22,000 gathered for the outdoor country music concert below.
On the night of October 1st, 2017, Las Vegas was under siege, with a gunman opening fire on a crowd of roughly 22,000 people gathered for the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival. The attack killed 60 individuals and left more than 850 wounded, making it the absolute deadliest mass shooting in modern U.S. history. The shooter was identified as Stephen Paddock, a 64-year-old retired accountant. On paper, he didn't fit profile many might expect. He had no criminal history, no strong political or religious ideology, and no clear motive. His background mostly revolved around real estate investments and high-stakes gambling. Paddock carried out the attack alone. He had checked into a suite on the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Resort days before, quietly stockpiling an arsenal of 23 firearms. Among them were AR-15 and AR-10 rifles modified with bump stocks, a device that allowed semi-automatic weapons to fire at a speed similar to fully automatic guns. And around 10:05 p.m., as country singer Jason Aldean performed, Paddock smashed two of his suite's windows and began firing into the crowd below. For the next 10 minutes, he fired over 1,000 rounds, many in rapid succession. Bullets rained across the 15-acre festival grounds, some traveling more than 500 yards, and with people packed tightly together and limited cover available, escaping the gunfire was extremely difficult. Panic set in, and first responders struggled to reach victims while navigating through so much chaos and debris. But don't be mistaken, Paddock had actually prepared for a drawn-out assault, as he brought along with him high-capacity magazines and even set up surveillance cameras in the hallway and on a food cart outside his room to monitor police. When Mandalay Bay security guard Jesus Campos approached the suite, Paddock shot him in the leg through the door. Luckily, Campos managed to alert authorities, giving them the shooter's location. But it wasn't until 11:20 p.m., more than an hour after the shooting began, that SWAT officers breached Paddock's room. Inside, they found him dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Subsequent investigations revealed that Paddock had meticulously planned the massacre. He had researched other large events, gradually accumulated weapons and ammunition, and carefully chosen his vantage point. Yet, no manifesto, side, note, or definitive explanation ever surfaced. The FBI ultimately concluded that he acted alone, maybe out of financial stress or a hunger for infamy. In 2020, Las Vegas put up a permanent memorial to honor the victims, a place where people could come to grieve and remember. But the Route 91 Harvest Festival itself has never gone back to that site, and probably never will. What still lingers, though, is the biggest question of all. Why did Stephen Paddock do it? With no clear motive ever found, the mystery just hangs there, leaving an unsettling void at the heart of one of Las Vegas's darkest nights.